It began with a glint on the water, an anomaly spotted by a low-orbit satellite scanning the eastern coast of North Korea. The image, grainy but unmistakable, showed a sleek, angular silhouette docked at Nampo shipyard, longer than anything previously recorded. Within hours, analysts at South Korea's Defense Intelligence Command were flooding encrypted channels. "This is no fishing vessel," one officer whispered. "They've built something new and fast." By the following day, North Korean state media confirmed what the satellites had already revealed. A triumphant report hailed the launch of the Huche Sea Guardian, a so-called next-generation warship. Official photos showed Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un standing at a launch ceremony, flanked by generals in full-dress uniform. Behind them, the warship loomed, painted black, its bow knife sharp, the deck bristling with what appeared to be missile launchers and radar domes. The broadcast called it a strike fist of the revolution, and claimed it had been built in record time by patriotic shipbuilders working around the clock. What startled foreign observers wasn't just the warship itself, it was the timeline. The vessel had not been visible in earlier satellite passes just weeks prior. No standard warship of its apparent class, whether corvette, missile frigate, or something in between, should have materialized so quickly. Questions exploded across defense forums and government briefings alike. Had North Korea mastered modular construction? Were they concealing shipbuilding underground? Or had the vessel been built in pieces elsewhere and only recently assembled at Nampo? In Tokyo, Prime Minister Shinji Arakawa summoned an emergency meeting of his National Security Council. "This ship's presence changes our naval posture," he said bluntly, a finger tapping the image projected behind him. Japan's maritime self-defense force shifted assets immediately. South Korea, equally rattled, launched reconnaissance flights along the disputed maritime border. The Pentagon, despite being embroiled in Indo-Pacific tension elsewhere, took notice. A senior U.S. Navy official, speaking off record, said, "They're not supposed to do this. Not at this speed. Not with this kind of silence." At the heart of the Pentagon's Korea desk sat Commander Rhea Connors, a naval engineer turned intelligence officer. She had spent years studying North Korea's maritime capabilities, from rusting patrol boats to sluggish diesel submarines. This new vessel didn't fit the pattern. Its lines suggested stealth. Its armament, if real, included cruise missile ports and what could be vertical launch systems. Rhea's job was to determine two things: how real the threat was, and how they built it under the world's nose. Back in Pyongyang, the regime's tone turned celebratory. Propaganda videos flooded local television, showing heroic laborers welding steel under red banners, chanting workers christening missile tubes, and naval officers saluting as waves crashed against the bow. But there was something deeper beneath the surface, something more strategic. The warship wasn't just a weapon, it was a message. To allies, enemies, and the impoverished citizens watching from dimly lit apartments, it said, "We can still surprise the world." Kim Jong-un, in private, was less triumphant. He knew this ship wasn't invulnerable. It was fast-built, possibly under-tested, and born under the constraints of sanctions that had crippled supply chains and strained even his most loyal engineers. Still, in a confidential Politburo meeting, he spoke with certainty. "We have shown the world we are not static. Our enemies must guess again." That ambiguity, was it functional or just a floating bluff, became the central conflict rippling through intelligence agencies worldwide. In Seoul, President Han Jae-min ordered a security audit of South Korea's naval response plan. In Washington, drone surveillance was redirected toward DPRK shipyards, and in Beijing, officials remained eerily silent, refusing to confirm or deny whether Chinese materials or expertise had quietly made their way north. The mystery deepened when Rhea Connors reviewed thermal scans from the week before the warship's appearance. There had been sudden heat spikes at 3 previously dormant facilities along the coast, suggesting late-stage welding, engine testing, and electronic integration. That kind of coordination was rare, even for advanced shipbuilders. For North Korea, it should have been impossible, unless someone had helped, or something new had changed behind the Hermit Kingdom's walls. What began as a simple observation now pulsed like a strategic riddle. A single ship, forged in secrecy, launched into a sea crowded with rival navies and distrust. Was it the beginning of a new naval doctrine, or just the flash of theater designed to provoke and confuse? As Rhea stared at the satellite images once more, she knew the answer wouldn't come from the vessel's silhouette. It would come from its origins, its build, its parts, and its hidden story. A warship could be armor and engines. But in North Korea's case, it might also be illusion, crafted to project power far beyond its weight. The story of how it was built, and why it was shown now, was only beginning to unfold. Rhea Connor sat hunched over a glowing console deep inside the secure vault of Naval Intelligence's East Asia Division. The data streams flickering before her weren't just pixels. They were fragments of a story, a construction process unfolding under clouds, behind tarps, and beneath regimes that preferred shadows to scrutiny. What she had found wasn't proof of a breakthrough, but of something far more dangerous: speed without precedent. The heat spikes detected near Nampo aligned with rapid welding activity, too synchronized to be organic. Factory logs hacked from North Korean industrial servers, courtesy of Allied cyber units, showed sudden bursts of 24-hour shifts in at least 3 locations, all near the coast. But what caught Rhea's attention was the pattern. Large modular units moved by rail during blackout hours, with timestamps suggesting minimal inspection time. They weren't building a ship. They were assembling one like it was a flat-packed weapon of war. It was classic modular construction, something the U.S. Navy had explored for efficiency, but rarely used at full scale due to concerns about structural integrity under combat stress. North Korea, it seemed, had no such restraint. Whether by desperation or design, they had embraced speed over scrutiny. But how had they even mastered such techniques under sanctions? That question led Rhea into the deeper maze of foreign footprints. In a separate encrypted report forwarded from Seoul, South Korean analysts highlighted peculiar similarities between the new vessel and aging Chinese Type 056 corvettes, especially in the bow angle and radar mast design. It was subtle, but not coincidental. Chinese shipyards had used similar modular layouts, and rumors of black market hardware flooding out of decommissioned Chinese naval stock were no longer whispers. North Korea had a reputation for copying, reverse engineering, or outright stealing. This warship might be a Frankenstein, parts drawn from old blueprints bolted together in record time, and there were whispers of more. Iranian drone experts reportedly visited Pyongyang in early spring, disguised as trade officials. Russian technicians, once involved in submarine programs, were believed to be among those advising North Korea's steel industries under the guise of civilian metallurgy. If true, the vessel wasn't just homegrown. It was international, built on borrowed ideas and stolen data, stitched together by a regime unconcerned with longevity, only with visibility. Inside the Workers' Party Shipbuilding Command in Pyongyang, the man overseeing the project, Colonel Park Min-jun, was both proud and terrified. He had pushed his engineers to the brink, cutting corners on composite layering and skipping secondary trials to meet Supreme Leader Kim's deadline. There had been accidents, one fatal explosion in a fuel line pressure test, and another when a missile tube failed during calibration. But Park had kept both off the books. No failure would stain the Husha Sea Guardian, not when it had become the regime's latest showpiece. Park knew the vessel wouldn't survive a prolonged naval engagement against U.S. or South Korean forces. Its hull plating was thin in spots, welded too quickly. The targeting system was experimental, rumored to be a modified radar lifted from old Soviet manuals and Chinese upgrades. Its fire control software was likely still buggy, but that didn't matter. It didn't have to fight well. It only had to exist and be seen doing so. In Washington, the tone around the table had shifted. Rhea, now briefing her superiors, outlined the theory that the warship was designed for strategic disruption rather than tactical advantage. "It's a bluff with a hard edge," she said. "Enough to unsettle our allies and slow our response time, but not enough to win a fight. They've weaponized perception." That point wasn't lost on South Korea either. President Han Jae-min's administration was now caught in a bind. If they overreacted, they'd amplify Pyongyang's message. But if they ignored it, they risked missing the start of a new naval doctrine, one that didn't wait for parity, only confusion. South Korea began upgrading its own anti-ship missile systems, deploying more fast attack crafts along the DMZ coast, and launching reconnaissance drones at greater frequency over the Yellow Sea. The ship, meanwhile, had already begun sea trials. Poorly filmed but widely circulated footage showed it cutting through the East Sea, flanked by smaller escorts. At one point, a missile was fired, short range, likely a KN-25 derivative, and state media declared the test a flawless strike against imperialist threats. No one believed it, but the message wasn't for them. It was for North Koreans watching at home, for generals in Iran wondering about new suppliers, and for diplomats trying to guess Pyongyang's next move. As the warship gained notoriety, Park Min-jun was summoned for a private meeting. Kim Jong-un's instructions were clear. A second vessel must be ready within 6 months, this time faster, cleaner, stronger. Park bowed deeply, hiding the worry in his eyes. He wasn't sure the yards could handle another rush, but refusal was not an option. Back in her office, Rhea stared at the blinking red markers on her digital map. New shipments were moving. Another hull, it seemed, was already under construction. She didn't know how long the illusion would hold, maybe months, maybe just days. But one thing was certain. The ship wasn't the end of a threat. It was the beginning of a strategy. North Korea had found a new weapon, not bombs or missiles, but the ability to appear stronger than it was, faster than it should be. And in a world ruled by optics as much as ordnance, that might be enough to shift the tide. The storm rolled in just as the Juche Sea Guardian left port again, its black hull slicing through waves swollen by monsoon winds. Colonel Park Min-jun stood on the bridge, his uniform damp with salt spray, eyes fixed ahead, jaw clenched in defiance and fatigue. This was no test run. It was a display, an orchestrated performance meant to project strength far beyond the vessel's actual capability. Cameras were rolling on deck, drones circled from above, and across the ocean, satellites blinked their silent acknowledgement. The world was watching. Inside, the crew moved with tense precision, a mixture of seasoned officers and hastily trained cadets. Most had never sailed beyond North Korean waters. Some had never fired a missile, let alone during sea trials. And yet they followed orders without hesitation. Not because they believed in the ship, but because failure aboard a symbol like this wasn't a misstep. It was treason. Park knew the illusion had to hold, not just for the international stage, but for the regime that demanded victory before proof. In Seoul, the launch triggered immediate tactical recalibration. President Han Jae-min convened his Joint Chiefs within the hour. On the projection screen, live satellite imagery tracked the Guardian's movements with a thick red line across the East Sea. Admiral Sun-ho leaned forward, noting the trajectory. "They're pushing closer to contested waters. It's a message. Deterrence through proximity." Han didn't blink. "Or bait," he replied. "Either way, we won't chase shadows." But it wasn't just South Korea reading the signals. In Washington, Rhea Connors updated her briefing again. The Guardian's course wasn't random. Its route traced old American naval paths from exercises long past. It was psychological warfare by maritime mimicry. "They're not just building ships," she told the room. "They're learning our patterns, then echoing them louder and faster." The core question echoed louder than ever. Was the Yucha Sea Guardian a genuine step forward in naval engineering, or a floating bluff with sharp edges? Analysts remained divided. The ship had fired again, this time 2 missiles, one of which failed mid-air. State media called it intentional targeting modulation, but radar confirmed a misfire. Still, the footage was repurposed, edited, and broadcast back into North Korea with triumphant music and thunderous commentary. To the regime's audience, it was a victory. To their enemies, it was a warning, one wrapped in theater, but not without consequence. Pak knew the warship's weaknesses better than anyone. Sections of the hull still flexed under pressure. The guidance system suffered from intermittent lag during sea maneuvers, but every issue was written off as adjustable post-deployment. In other navies, such flaws would delay a launch. In North Korea, they were simply ignored until reality broke under propaganda's weight. Meanwhile, whispers spread in Tehran and Damascus. Could this new model be exported? Iran had already reverse-engineered drones and missiles with North Korean help. Now, its naval strategists wondered whether a Guardian-class corvette might bolster its own fast attack squadrons in the Persian Gulf. Syrian generals, too, asked questions. The ship, regardless of its flaws, had achieved one key goal. It made North Korea look innovative again. Back at sea, a sudden alarm rang through the Guardian's interior. A minor electrical fire had broken out near the missile bay. Smoke crept through the ventilation system. Crew members scrambled to respond, adrenaline masking fear. Pak, watching the chaos from the command deck, remained still. He didn't rush to help. He didn't shout orders. He just stared at the smoke, gray against the rain-streaked glass, and wondered how many more secrets this ship could contain before it betrayed him. The fire was contained. The voyage continued, but the illusion, now slightly cracked, would only grow harder to maintain. Pak knew a second vessel was already being assembled in the western yards, faster this time, less oversight, more pressure. He wondered how many more shortcuts would be ordered, and how many more lives it would cost to pretend that this fleet was more than a performance. In a bunker beneath Seoul, Rhea examined the latest intercepts. Internal North Korean chatter flagged a structural stress anomaly on the Guardian's starboard side. A small fracture unconfirmed, but it matched her theory that the ship wasn't meant to last. It was a projection, not a platform, a symbol, not a solution. "They've weaponized failure," she said. "Even if it breaks, it'll serve its purpose, as long as it breaks after we blink first." And still, the world blinked. International headlines praised or mocked the warship, depending on their politics. Military strategists debated its true range and survivability. But one truth remained clear. North Korea had changed the conversation, not through sheer strength, but through speed, audacity, and spectacle. The game had shifted. The Guardian didn't need to win a war. It only needed to make others wonder if one was coming. Pak returned to port weeks later, exhausted but hailed as a hero. At the shipyard gates, workers cheered, unaware of the near fire on board or the silent faults beneath the deck. Kim Jong-un watched the ceremony from a private viewing platform, his applause slow, deliberate. He turned to his advisors with a smile. "Begin the next phase," he said. "Louder, bigger, faster." And far away, in the dark corridors of U.S. naval intelligence, Rhea whispered the closing line of her report, meant not for press or public, but for the few who understood the stakes. "It isn't the ship we should fear. It's the speed at which illusion becomes strategy.